on it. We are recording.
Awesome.
So, Andy, why don't you tell everybody why we're even having this conversation?
Why are we having this conversation? Nigel every so often, lots of Scrum trainers get together and have opinions about stuff. It's probably a great way of putting it. And Dan, Nigel, and I were part of a group where Nigel proposed a question, and I'm gonna paraphrase it because I can't remember exactly, but it was the product owner role with Kanban, or what, is it an anti-pattern or something along those lines, right?
So it was is Kanban, will Kanban eat Scrum for lunch?
That was it.
And then the subtext was the product owner is the Achilles heel of Scrum.
That was it. Yes. And so we got into a really interesting discussion. We just ran out of time, and it got to a point where I just felt we had some unanswered perspectives that needed kind of resolving, or just exploring a little bit more. So I offered to just kind of get us three together, and here we are, which is just, I'm really actually very, very pleased we are meeting again.
No, I am too, and just for the record, I'm a massive fan of Kanban. There's the philosophical or the descriptive side of Kanban from my Toyota Lean sort of side of my body, and then there's the sort of Kanban-esque stuff, the methodologists that have created Kanban methods in the agile world, and I'm not against any of them. I get aggravated when people when they describe X as Y when they're not the same thing, and I do like to delineate or differentiate the Kanban as a visualization technique, and Kanban is the enabler of a just-in-time system. I'm sure Kanban Dan, as it says on the screen, will have some other wisdom to add. Dan, I guess people will just figure out who we are. So Dan, what do you think?
So I think it's worth kind of saying we're all coming from different points or perspectives on Kanban. We're all PSTs, so we're all Scrumists, one flavor of another. I come in from the Kanban University to talk about the Kanban method. Andy's with Pro Kanban, so Kanban strategy. And Nigel's coming from Kanban as in what they used to do in the car factories, or what they do in the car factories. So what led to lean manufacturing and led to everything. So we do all have slightly different takes on very similar things, using very similar words, which just is awesome because it confuses absolutely everybody, which is really annoying, but there you go. And we also have the Scrum background as well, so we're a bit there. So
yeah, and I think it's just to call out, we're PSTs, which means we represent scrum.org as Scrum trainers, as opposed to the other different bodies out there that represent Scrum. Because I know, Andy, you said we're all this Scrum thing, and this Scrum thing, for everybody's perspective, was the annual getting together of different Scrum trainers of Scrum.org for what we call our face-to-face meetings, which keeps us all in touch with the community and each other, which I think is an important consideration. And in fact, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. So it proves there's value in such approaches. And it's interesting that you two represent two Kanban methods or approaches, and poor old me here is going to be in a real battle royale between the two of you. At least I'm at the top right of my screen as I look at you two, so I'm not sort of sandwiched between you.
I don't think, I don't know. I don't think there's from my perspective, there's no implied war or anything going on.
No.
And where we were kind of heading with the conversation is, I take a very practical stance in when I'm helping teams and when I'm helping people understand how to leverage flow as part of whatever they're doing. Again, I just use the basic principles, and again, it's kind of whether you subscribe to a method or it is an ability to change people's behaviors as they approach work. That for me is where I sit. It's all around having the right conversation with people to elicit some kind of change. And yeah, whether you want to sit on, one side of the fence or the other, I don't know. I'm not that fundamentalist from that perspective, right? For me, a lot of actually it's all about the people.
Exactly.
And I think we were kind of talking a little bit in the preamble or getting there in that kind of thinking.
I think this is the thing. When organizations specifically decide we need to do something different. This agile thing might be a different way that offers us more success than our predictive methods, project management for everything. That's an admission, or well, it's not an admission, it's a request for change. It's a demand for change. And I think where people get hung up is what we do with Kanban versus what we do with Scrum. It's still actually the same thing. It's just how we start and how it moves along. In Scrum, I at the talk we had last week, I put out Scrum's pretty revolutionary actually in its approach, and it kind of comes down to that Ken quote. Someone threw out a Ken quote. Ken Schwaber, that Kanban is Scrum for people who've got the cojones to see it through. I think.
Oh no, or was it Scrum's? Well, Kanban is for the people who don't have the courage. You used a different metaphor for doing Scrum or using Scrum.
But I mean, that's the thing. Scrum's pretty much in your face. And this is where you were with the whole product owner thing. If you're going to do Scrum, we call it the 3-5-3 for shorthand. You've got 3 sets of accountabilities that you've got to have. You've got 3 artifacts that you've got to work towards. I guess and you've got to have 5 events that you practice. And that's day one. And that means, you need a product owner. And that's tricky. That's the tricky bit for most organizations. What on earth is this product owner? What does that mean? Scrum Master is a kind of new extra thing. I kind of get that. But what's this product owner thing? Oh, that sounds like a cool title. Let's just give it to somebody who's really busy and hasn't got the time to do the actual thing. Whereas Kanban comes in from actually, you're already doing something. It's already pretty effective. Let's take a proper look at it, show you it, and see where you want to make changes. And one of the things that typically comes around is you probably need someone who's the value maximizer, someone who's really focused on delivering value to the customer. Oh, that's kind of what we call a product owner, isn't it? Yeah. Kind of. So you end up, I guess, often coming to the same place.
Let me throw in a few things I'm scribbling down as you two are talking. So I agree. Well, I agree with everything both of you are saying. I mean, this is going to be an easy conversation because it won't be so exciting for the viewers because we all agree with everything. But if you stop talking about methods and tools and start talking about behaviors, and that's sort of my my deconstruction of things like communication, collaboration, shared mental models, shared cognitions, it all comes down to behaviors, how we behave towards one another and towards situations. And in the literature, we're all described as agents. So an agent being people, machines, things, stuff that enables things to happen. And I also define lean and agile as philosophies. They're not methodologies, they're not tools, because if you read the manifesto, it's a philosophy. It's not a methodology. If we use the manifesto as the sort of definition of what most people define as agile, and I'm more than happy to change that definition. I also believe agility is emergent. It's an emergent property of how we behave and interact. It's not a thing you go do, and you become agile, like you become adaptable, like you become flexible, and so on. Lots of other words that end in ul. And lean isn't a collection of tools. It's how we actually behave towards given situations, events, organizations. And the lean techniques, if we look at lean techniques, it actually describes human behaviors. And I'm actually getting no pushback from my lean peers who are pretty senior lean peers. I'm talking people like Jeff Leiker and Mike Rother and others who are seen as luminaries and senior peers in this world. Maybe they're my superiors rather than peers. And so they seem happy with that. And Dan, you mentioned the revolutionary change, and that's in the lean terms, what we call a kaikaku. And I pronounce it the way I've always pronounced it, even if that's wrong. But I used it in Toyota in that way to Japanese people, and they seemed okay with that. Or they just were giving me, a pass and just and so, but one of the things is you write with the product owner, we need somebody who prioritizes the stuff we should work on. And I'm using very loose terms here rather than trying to be prescriptive. Now, does that have to be a product owner? No, that's the construct within Scrum. My belief also, and we can talk about the product owner as an Achilles heel and this sort of Scrum forcing this kaikaku, this revolutionary change, this organizational disruption or change to be successful, and whether it's a good thing, a bad thing. But I'm going to posit something here. I think Kanban is the entry point, and then Scrum may be something, an approach, a framework, if you prefer. I see it as a behavioral pattern, but let's say a framework as Scrum describe it themselves. as something you may adopt, but you start with Kanban and you may use Scrum if it's contextually relevant when you discover what it is you need to fix. Because Kanban is a visualization technique, and it literally translates to billboard or signboard in Japanese, then that really makes visible the work we're doing. In a recent recording I made, work as done versus work as imagined. It's not this notion of how work gets done. We actually really truly see it, as long as you got all the columns on the board and you can see all the steps and the cues and everything else. Then you can start to say, well, what is the context of the work we're doing? Where are the challenges in getting that work done? What are the things we need to solve for, at least alleviate or mitigate, using different words? And then Scrum may be contextually appropriate if we are talking about product delivery, and product being a construct rather than a tacit physical thing. So there's a few ideas for you to chew on and spit back at me.
So it's interesting, as you were talking, I was kind of like thinking, what I'm hearing is that there's a structure issue, and I'm kind of thinking about a particular challenge that was given to me only last week, where the team are working with a product owner, but they're not really a product owner. And they're not really doing anything. They're basically just trying to manage work. And this is a common pattern we will all have seen a lot of the times, and they're struggling. And some of that is around the structure and how they are functioning as a team. So some of that is in the behavior, some of that is in the handoff, some of that is in the implicit or non-explicit handoffs and trade-offs between, oh, I thought you were doing that, or I'm not, nobody's taking accountability for that. And so I think this is where looking at, if we call Kanban a strategy or a method, I've seen Dan laugh, but what often people aren't doing Kanban, right? They're basically just trying to make the best of what they've got and trying to manage work the best way they know how. And so they're not really doing Kanban any better than they're doing Scrum. And so all Scrum, my perspective on Scrum, and I've said this quite a few times, is it's a conversation framework, and it says let's just talk really often, let's talk every day or whatever, whichever cadence you want to pick, but 1 month or less, let's have a conversation. What you do within that framework is entirely up to you, and this is why I'm a massive advocate for Scrum with Kanban and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think what I'm seeing is it's a structure around how work is enacted or change is enacted, compared to just being a trade-off between methods, frameworks, strategies. I just want to cover all of them. I don't know, Dan, your perspective on that.
I think we forget how hard this stuff is. Have either of you got any bad habits that you've tried to give up over the years?
No, we're perfect, Dan. No,
okay. Yeah, indeed. I mean, some people
out,
are blameless and faultless, apparently.
Yeah. Well, I'm a 48-year-old man who bites his nails. What's going on with that? I know biting my nails is something I don't want to do. It's a very bad image, but it's something I do unconsciously, and it's hard to break habits. Never mind learn new ones. And then actually hear something, oh no, it's not a bunch of practice and tools. It's about the mindset. It's about the culture. That's hard, because that's not how people learn. So people, it's the old joke, and it was a really bad joke when Arnold Schwarzenegger did it in a film. I ask a taxi cab driver in New York, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. And, that's fundamentally what people need when they're coming to this agile stuff, whether it be Kanban, whether it be Scrum, whether it be XP, DevOps, pick a flavor. What they need is a way that makes it accessible for them to start building some muscle memory. And I used to be a rugby coach, and I used to take people's little pride and joys, their kids, and teach them how to play rugby. My job, because I always got the new kids in our team, they were busy doing all this, that, and the other. I would take them aside and I would show them how to tackle properly and safely. Because if you can tackle properly and safely without risking breaking your neck, you can start playing, because anyone can throw a ball kind of backwards and anyone can run. Okay, so let's do that. So it's, how can I make it safe to fail for them and get them playing as quickly as possible? Because if we just do a load of drills and stuff, they're not coming back next week. It's an optional extra, right? They don't have to come. It's not a school or something. So it's, how do I get them playing? How do I get them learning? So that whole empirical thing, yeah, it's about transparency, inspection, and adaptation, but it's actually learning by doing something. And even it's the bit we ignore at the Agile Manifesto. We have, through doing it and helping others to do it, we have come to value. And it's a doing it method. All of this agile stuff, agile is just an adjective at the end of the day. You still have to do stuff. It's just whether you do it in an agile way, you're able to change direction quickly or not. I mean, it's as simple
funny
as
you
that.
talk about
And I think we
adjectives.
as experts forget how hard it is to just get started. And that's why people focus on the frameworks when they're starting the stuff. They have to, because that's something to do.
But as human beings, we need structure, and this is where I kind of I can't remember. I was talking about like this humanistic behavior. Oh no, it was a strong desire to common problem. Again, you'll have seen. When am I getting my stuff? Okay, so the human behavioral reaction is I need to go and understand everything about everything in order to estimate it and then formulate a plan. So like it must be, and again, I don't know, like, human behavior and the theory behind it, but my God, that is a human behavior right there. I need to go and understand and control a really complex situation, and this is what we see a lot of. It's how do we encourage people to think about solving or even breaking those very intrinsic human behaviors around control? What can we offer them that will give them some kind of confidence and escape from that perspective and give them back that that element of control while giving them the ability to be flexible and still carry on.
So what you've just described, Andy, is behaviors. Everything that a lot of what Dan was saying, what you were saying is behaviors.
Yeah.
And let's talk about a few of the things you mentioned. I'm going to be critical of the Scrum Guide, and I've told our Scrum colleagues at head office there that I have issues with some of it. The fact that the PO isn't a role anymore, it's an accountability, which if you look at the definition of a job role, then accountabilities are in there. So it's still a role. I disagree with the whole thing, just calling it an accountability, but I think it's linguistic gymnastics for other purposes, potentially. But the product owner role has a clear role in Scrum. It's not this arbitrary, just prioritize stuff. There's a much more deep definition for that. And whereas in, if we're talking about an intake column on a Kanban board, it might just be somebody prioritizing based on SLAs, OLAs, and who screams the loudest type of thing. So that brings us to empowerment versus delegation, because a lot of problems we see in organizations, the product owner role isn't empowered, and at best it's a proxy delegation from somebody else who wants to make all the decisions but doesn't want to put the participation and engagement and effort into the work necessary in the way the Scrum Guide defines the PO, or regardless of the Scrum Guide, the way good practitioners define how a good product owner functions and operates. So we need to cover that. There's another thing I have an issue with the Scrum Guide. We've got artifacts committing to artifacts. So we've got abstract constructs committing to other abstract constructs. So like the product goal committing, or the product backlog committing to the product goal. So we've got an inanimate object, a thing, committing to another thing. And I find, and the same with the sprint backlog, sprint goal, and what is it that commits to the definition of done? I don't know. Anyway, so the thing is this, that I have an issue with that. And actually, when you look at the literature and you look at how people explain that not the Scrum Guide itself, but people who interpret that type of thing, it's weird that an object's like my can of water committing to my iPhone. It's nonsensical. Dan, I know you want to jump in at that point and clarify that. Yeah.
So I went to a meetup group last night. The joy of COVID, if there is such a thing, is I can go to any meetup. So I was in Stockport last night, and a mutual acquaintance of ours, Dave Snowden, was doing a talk about Cynefin. And
you were at that thing last night. That's awesome.
I was, and he was having a good old chat about companies having purpose, and it's just the new mission statements. And I have a very different take on that. I think if it's someone else's purpose, it's just a mission statement, and who cares? I'll either blow smoke up your backside, or I'll ignore it. I'll say the platitudes or whatever. But if it's my purpose, if it's about me and what I'm committing to and what I'm doing, then it's super powerful in my view. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about with the commitment. So we're not talking about, say, the definition of done being a commitment to the increment. It's we use that as a commitment for us, the team, to commit to the increment. So we're saying
Or
we're
is
not
it the
going to.
instrument that's committing to the DoD? I mean, that's a confuse. See, that's the problem. I
If
agree
it's-
with you. If we have purpose, or you have purpose, or together we have
Yeah.
collective purpose, we commit to achieving that outcome, that purpose, that goal,
Yeah,
whatever it. And
We
however
are committed.
describe
I
it,
think
yeah.
it's probably a better way.
And I
of describing it.
agree with that. And I tend to agree with Dave a lot, of course, because he's a good friend. But I mean, I
Yeah.
also agree because I think he's right in some things. But so a lot of mission statements, vision statements, purpose nonsense on walls is wallpaper. And although Americans won't know what we mean by wallpaper generally, but it just sort of disappears into wall art. And it becomes meaningless and just a platitude. Sorry, I cut you off, Dan, but it was really interesting what you were saying.
No, I think that there's a lot to that. It took me a non-agile moment to learn about this. I went along with my rugby coaching training, and it was a coaching class for rugby coaches doing the 15-a-side game in England, Scotland, and Wales. And they said, here are our values. And you learned all about treads, teamwork, respect, enjoyment, discipline, sportsmanship. And here are the principles. By the way, what do you bring to the table? What's your philosophy? What do you mean? You have to come up with what your own philosophy is, because you can subscribe to our values, you can subscribe to our principles. They're available to you, and of course you may disagree with some of them, but they're ours, and we aren't changing them because one coach doesn't like them. But you must subscribe to them or not on your own terms. But what's in it for you? What's special about you? What do you bring of yourself to this? And I think that's really important. Another great article on this, I know straight off into coaching, there's a guy called Joe Ehrman who used to be a defensive tackle in the NFL in America. And he got into some really dodgy things. He did all of the stereotypical things you expect an American footballer to do. And he eventually cured himself of all that. And after he got fired, got himself clean, and he decided he wanted to do something about this societal pressure on young men in America to act in a certain way if they happen to be sports people. So he's now a coach of coaches, really, and a high school football coach, because there's no point in him going to college, because he does have a purpose, which is to change the vision of masculinity in America. And by the time they're in college, it's too late, never mind the NFL. So he's trying to get them at the high school level. And he has these 4 great questions that I love for coaches. And and one of them will get you. But the first one's a toughie. Why do you coach? The second is, why do you coach the way you do? The third one is the one that hit my imposter syndrome like you wouldn't believe, which is, how does it feel to be coached by you? Good, I think. Ooh. Oh, hang on. And then 4, what does success look like? Because it might not be about dollars. It might not be about getting players into the NFL or into college scholarships. It might be about just helping that young man be a better young man and helping society because of that, which leads to something else. And it's becoming this big thing. But I think we need, in agile coaching, to understand that coaching predates us a little bit. And there's this whole big thing out there. An agile coach doesn't mean an expert in agile. Agile is the easy bit, actually. The coaching bit's the hard bit, is what I found. And there's so much more information out there. And this is where I think it all comes together, because we need to enable organizations to do something that's hard. And the approach we take, fundamentally coming back to the Scrum or Kanban thing, it's dependent on them and where they are. It's what's right for them in that situation. Sometimes they just need that bit of revolution in my head, or it's brand new. We're just forming our first team. What should we do? Well, start with what you do now is not the greatest principle, which is principle number 1 of the Kanban method. So let's, this 12-page Scrum guide, that's fairly simple. We can read that. We can all agree about that. We can get some training and off we go. Or we can just start anyway and see what happens. But I think that's where it becomes on us, is what's the best for them in our judgment, and our judgment's always going to be part of it, and we aren't impartial. How can we help them best do their thing better?
Yeah. And
that's the end game, right?
And I'm trying desperately not to weigh in on what an agile coach is thing, right? But I mean, I would love to have more conversations about people and behaviors and teams and better ways of working, rather than fix our Jira, tell us what Kanban is, help us limit WIP, and I guess it's yeah, all those those 4 questions are great, because I've asked myself. It's funny. I was talking to another coach today, and we were kind of reflecting on, our value of coaching, what I get out of coaching, the kind of coaching I look for, and this, being at home, trying to coach remotely, we're kind of spinning off into away from topic, and I recognize that. So please bring us back, Nigel. But I think, I don't know about you two particularly, but I've found it incredibly hard to coach remotely in the way organizations have expected. It's almost like they've expected problem fixers rather than people who will help them on their journey. It's come in and solve a very, very specific problem, rather than, okay, let's work together, look at and observe and see what's going on with, your team, your system, whatever that looks like, and then start to tune and work with you from a performance point of view. So I probably ought to say, I look at, Dan will probably recognize this from a rugby coaching point of view, but I kind of call myself a performance coach, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an uplift in performance from either a team or a system or an organization, or whatever you want to call it, even to a personal level. That's the kind of thing I'm looking to get out of coaching. And so
I'm going to jump in there, Andy, because you're hitting a really important point. Our role, in my view, this is again all my opinions, of course, not necessarily shared by yourselves or anybody else, but our role is not to go and tell them what they need to do and how to do it.
Yep.
Our role is help them to be able to see what needs to be done and help them understand what they can do to fix these things. Teach a man to fish, teach them to learn to see, type of thing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Which is what you're describing in essence. And that's and just to I don't want to hit on agile coaches per se, but there's too many people teaching methods and tools out there, and not enough people coaching people and behaviors.
Yes.
And that's because they're unqualified to do the latter, or maybe don't even understand the latter. And that's actually comes from experience, the sensei model, and you've grown through an organization, you've lived the challenges, lived the sort of the what is that book? It was written, Scrum from the whatever it was called.
Scrum from the trenches. Is that what you're
that place you wrote, and that type of thing. But it's really what we're talking about. We have lived organizational change and turmoil and all this angst in the context that we're in. So if you're in software, then you should be experienced with software to be coaching in a software context. If you're coaching a hospital and you know nothing about medicine and patient care, maybe you ought to go find a job in a context you're familiar with, because, as I made a joke in one of my recent videos, doing Scrum in the operating room is not something I'm going to recommend, because iterative operations, when you're actually in the OR, or in English terms, the theatre, is probably not the best thing for us. I want to pick up on what you've done, because point 2, you said, and I wrote it down, why I coach the way I do. I have a problem. I don't know how I coach. And I think that's where I either need to do reflective observation, some hindsight, some deep self-reflection, or I need others to give me that critical feedback and that observation of me and explain to me how I coach. Because I can identify some characteristics and behaviors, some positive that need amplifying, some not so positive that should be dampened a tad. And it's hard being a Brit like you two, because it's that inbuilt British sarcasm, and living in the USA, it comes out like Tourette's occasionally, and unfortunately upsets some of my American counterparts. That's why my resume has always been in 2-year segments. You can fill in the blanks yourself. But it sort of brings me back to some of the things that you were mentioning as well, and try and steer us back into the conversation. But mindsets, a lot of people, you just need the agile mindset. You just need to have lean mindset. And mindsets are emergent. They are individual. They are implicit within a person. We can explain I can tell you what my mindset is. So I'm making my mindset explicit to you. Yeah. I can't force you to adopt it. You create your own views, your internal views, your implicit guidance and control. And that emerges. What we try and coach our teams to be more effective. And I'm using very precise language here rather than efficient or high performing, because high performing teams are teams that are more effective. And that's again from the literature. But we're doing that through helping them develop those innate skills to develop shared mental models, shared cognitions. And that comes back to the purpose. I'm going to stop talking because that was bursting.
I do have a disagreement. That might add some spice. Have you seen the TV show Ted Lasso?
No.
No.
So here's the premise. The owner of a football club goes through a nasty divorce, and the wife owns the club and hates the ex-husband. The ex-husband loves the club, so she decides she's going to make it fail. Best way to make this soccer club fail is to hire in this coach from American football who knows nothing about soccer and set him up. Let the hilarity ensue. But I do kind of like this premise of this guy doesn't know football or doesn't know soccer, but what he does know is how to coach people. And I think that's the important thing. I honestly think, so I got the delight of being invited to England Rugby's headquarters, just up the road from me, actually, Pennyhill Park, to do a masterclass in coaching. And they took us around all sorts of interesting facilities. They have this thing called the Scrum Garden, which is where they practice scrums and line out, all the forwards work there. And it was really interesting to me. I thought, if I was coaching the England forwards, because I was a forwards coach in rugby, so I'm a scrum coach 2 different ways, would I be effective? Could I be effective? Every single one of those players has played rugby to a much higher level than I ever did and has achieved more as a rugby player than I ever would or ever could. Could I be an effective coach with them? And I thought, oh, you know what? I could, because coaching isn't about me knowing more than them. Coaching is about me getting them to provide the best out of themselves.
Yeah.
And now, do I need to understand much? I have been a Kanban and Scrum coach in an exploration team in oil and gas. I am not a geophysicist. In fact, I was running that team. I learned the difference between a geologist and a geophysicist. One person touches the rocks, the other people, when you look at computer stuff about the rocks, like seismic, it turns out. And, reservoir engineers, I didn't even know what. I'd never even heard of the existence of a reservoir engineer until I took that role. Was I able to do my thing and help them do the agile thing? Yeah, absolutely. Turns out that pairing kind of works. Making people think out loud rather than silently in their own head is an effective way of getting things done. Having people collaborate on a problem rather than focus on their area of specialism, it turns out it's effective there too. And I think that's really important. This is the thing, agile coaching, and we've ended up in a completely different discussion. I know that. Agile coaching isn't, you're doing it wrong, here's how you do it better. I really don't like those conversations. Agile coaching is, oh, this is where you are. Can I show you what that looks like?
Yeah.
Can I ask you what you think needs to change based on
That's
what you're there?
the key point.
And by the way,
That's
here's some stuff
question.
you might want to learn about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having this discussion, training people today, and I was explaining the value of a Scrum Master to the team today. Around is just, I was explaining it from my point of view, having a running coach. You need somebody there to hold you accountable to your performance to some degree, and just hold that mirror up and say, you know what, you're currently looking like this, and actually, why don't you try this pattern out? Why don't you try this out? And you may get, slightly quicker times. Keep in touch with me. We'll keep going, etc. Here's next week's schedule. This is what you want to do, and pushing it forward and forward. Whether you call that person in a team a Scrum Master, or whether you just call them a coach of the team, you need somebody there. You do genuinely need somebody as part of the team to act as a third-party voice for coaching. And this is I don't know whether I call it a frustration, I guess slight sadness around organizations not recognizing that as a need. Because, if you just say, hey, I'm going to be, I want to join your organization as a personal coach. They'll go, okay, so you're going to do some one-to-one stuff. Yeah, okay, sure. But actually there's this team thing over here that they could really benefit with, probably some time with me, and just looking how they're working. Or I don't know how else you describe it. I don't want to go in as a Scrum Master, and I don't really want to go in and call myself an Agile coach. I want to actually just help your organization grow, perform better. If we end up talking about Agile, we'll talk about Agile, but let's look at the human behaviors. Let's look at the teams, and let's stop talking to people like humans. Oh God, how many times have I said that recently? Be more human. I need one of those T-shirts to say "Be more human." I think.
So it's interesting, and I think it's an important topic. And Dan, I don't disagree with you. I think what I'm trying to say is that if if you go into something that you've got, I mean, it depends on the sports is always a difficult thing because a lot of people have some understanding or empathy of sports. They've got some knowledge, even if, I mean, I understand rugby. I played it at school and I watch it on TV. I don't know all the intricacies. I'm not an expert on it. I think it's the real version of American football, which will have people throwing things at the screen right now, because American football, they seem to fall down a great deal and just get up and grunt and run 2 feet and fall down again. But the point
you're not making it any better for yourself.
Well, the thing is, when I talked to Dave about this, because he's a massive rugby fan, is Scrum. Okay, so Scrum lives in the complex domain, and most people will tell you that American football lives in the complicated domain. There's more structure and rules based and process around it. But Dan, you're going to contradict me on that, I know.
No. I literally had a similar epiphany in my rugby coaching course. We were talking about coaching for rugby union, and the breakdown in rugby union is very complex. There are so many variables. So we are coaching players to make good intuitive decisions in the moment, given what they see. Whereas I was looking at rugby league, which is another form of rugby where it's much more structured. And when there's a tackle, the tackler doesn't release the tackle player. They lie on top of them for a few seconds. Eventually, they both stand up, standing facing each other, have a mate stand behind. The tackle player does what we call a chicken scratch and rolls the ball back under their foot. He passes it to another big lump, who runs forward, gets tackled, and the same thing happens again until they've run out of 5 tackles, and then they kick the ball away. Okay, I'm not a rugby league fan, but the point is the contact in rugby union is very dynamic and there are a lot of variables. In rugby league, it's very, very structured, and basically it's in the ordered domain side of Cynefin. It's on the right-hand side, maybe complicated, may even be fairly clear, actually. So I remember being in my rugby course thinking, I need to teach these people like Cynefin. Can I get away with that with a lot of rugby coaches? But it really is, because in rugby union, it's like, do I have any support? Are there 2 of them? Is someone going to try and take the ball off me? What's the scoreboard? Where am I on the pitch? All these different variables affect your decision of what you do.
It's probably stretching the analogy thing, but going back to that, we were talking about structure being this kind of necessity or need earlier. You have to wonder that the structure at some point was put in place to provide that level of, I don't know, certainty of, fairness in the game. I don't know. I'm not a rugby league expert, but I think the structure thing is, for me, is still comes down to an interesting, turning it back into topic, right? But it's still an interesting dynamic that we still need structure around our lives. Constant chaos and constant uncertainty can lead to lots of stress, and we only have the last couple of years to look back on, or a year and a half to look back on, in terms of people, feelings, motivations, jobs, families, lives, everybody has, everything's been up in the air. Everyone's had to deal with, some level of certainty or uncertainty about their life. I've had people who've given up, I've got very good mates who have given up their jobs and done what they call their side hustles, right? And they've gone and built businesses off the back of actually just being put in a different position. It's kind of forced that behavior. And other people have receded into themselves and just almost broken down, because it's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this? And so I guess we have the period in which we're living at the moment is, I wonder what we're going to look back on in the future and think, did we as human beings act in the right way? How could we have acted differently? I don't know. For me, there's just something quite interesting in trying to draw that structure back to why. Even if you took Kanban, I'm going to bring it back on topic, right? Even if you took Kanban and said Kanban has a structure, and it implies some level of structure around it, that there is still a need, because you still need to be limiting the work you're doing, however you want to go about that limiting. But we know that provides good results. We know that changes the behaviors and the way people approach work. And so for me, that's a structure. And if you're still not doing that, you're in that kind of chaotic, complex mode. And I think, this is where, again, coming back to topic, but I think this is where you could start to look at where Kanban tries to add structure from a perspective. Scrum comes in and and says, hey, look, there's a grander structure here, because we're gonna tell you've got to talk, every so often, the conversation stuff.
I'm working on a video at the minute on Cynefin, just because I've been asked to, and I thought, why not? And so I've been looking a lot of it. I've been to talk to David. Well, I've been to David's meetup last night and watched the video. He says, if you're in chaos, this is a thing that just resonated, and it's the first time I've heard it was today. If you're in chaos, the first thing you need to do is add one constraint. And that's, I think, when I talk to organizations about Kanban and I explain the Kanban method, it's not about teams. It's about end-to-end service like the customer sees. From someone's had a good idea till I've got it, from the browse moment on Amazon until you got a brown box in your hand or a refund in your bank account. That's the service. And I usually ask this question with people. Can you tell me the job title of the most junior person in your organization who has control over that end-to-end service? And almost every time the job title starts with the letter C, as in Chief Operating Officer, Chief Executive Officer, because we have these department things that get in the way, and then the heads of department are in competition with each other for the next job. So while they're all trying to do great by the customer, actually, it's that next level up. So just that to me is pretty chaotic. That's a pretty chaotic way to run your business. If you're delivering service and you don't have anybody in your organization who's trying to make our end-to-end service better, you kind of missed a trick for me. So adding one constraint, let's limit WIP in such a way that you have to now come to agreement on what the priority is. And it doesn't change when it goes through different teams and different departments. We agree end to end what our priority is, what we're going to do is. That's that first constraint that takes you out of chaos. And now you're kind of looking for, and now what's going to happen? What's going to become visible because we did that one thing? And I think that's where Kanban, although it is kind of evolution, because we say, well, start by showing us what you actually do. Don't change anything, just map it out. Map out the policies. Don't add new policies. What are your policies? And Dan Venkanti and I have had some interesting conversations over the years about classes of service. And what I'm very clear to do when I teach people and to teach the people to be teaching in the future as well is we don't add class of services to systems. We uncover the ones they already have. Like I've worked in organizations where their IT team's got a VIP button. All right, there's an expedite level of class of service there. Do we know the impact of that? Oh, you add artificial dates to stuff. All right, so you're doing fixed date delivery. Do you know the impact of that on all your other work and making it visible?
Really
so
interesting.
Perhaps you step out of it, perhaps.
Yeah,
but adding these constraints makes it visible, I think.
No, I was going to say that's a really interesting clarification you've put on that class of service, because I think what a lot of people think with Kanban is you have to have them, right? So, and a lot of people go in and go, oh, we'll just create an expedite and we all know what happens, right? And I think this is, I'm really pleased you brought that up, because I hear a lot of people saying, well, oh gosh, we've now uncovered our workflow and our work stream. We now need to find a quicker route through this, so we'll put in an expedite, just because. And
that's
sorry, Nigel.
I want to pick up on this. There's a whole bunch of notes I've written because there's a lot of interesting concepts, and that's where we have to look at Kanban as developed through Toyota's production system as a just-in-time pull-based system versus how we're now using it, because there's no such thing as an expediting Kanban in the factory. You don't suddenly expedite this Lexus instead of this Corolla. This isn't how it works, and it's not built like that. And Kanban is, literally in the factories is a card that tells you when you need parts pulling towards you from wherever they come from, the centralized factory or something else. And the whole point of having a system like that is that you work on we'll talk about priority in a minute. So go back to the sort of Scrum product owner thing on priority, but the whole idea of a Kanban-based system is you level the workflow, you remove the peaks and troughs, you remove the under and overutilization. So if you go into gold rat and TOC and all this, we're trying to get rid of all those constraints or bottlenecks, and they are subtly different. A constraint being an organizational limitation, a bottleneck being a capacity/resource limitation. And that's how it's, again, defined in I keep referring to the literature. I'm getting schooled by professors and I have to refer to the actual way it's been peer reviewed. But the whole point is that we're wanting this continuous leveled flow. And if you want to introduce a priority or change a priority at the intake, you introduce it there. You shouldn't bypass the system because what you've actually done is caused an additional constraint somewhere in the system by expediting it through the system, unless you've just got all this free capacity lying around ready to go do the big boss's whims and demands. And to close this comment, and I'll go back to my notes later when Dan's jumped in again, is that if you've got executives who can do that, you've got inappropriate behaviors, you don't have empowerment throughout the organization, you don't have distributed leadership, you have command and control, that everything can run like it should run until I want something. And then I'm going to disrupt that system. And unless you've built in sufficient robustness or resilience in the system to cater for these blips, and those blips should be external factors, geopolitical, customer demand, supply chain, not the boss who just decides he wants something faster today. So then unless you've built in sufficient buffer or capacity resilience, then the system is going to be disrupted and impacted by that behavior. And looping back to what you said, Andy, a lot of it comes back to, we need to be coaching people and behaviors and helping them see the impact of their actions and decisions, help them gain alignment, shared cognition, shared man, lots of words around this. I'm going to give it back to you in a second, Dan, because I do want to go eventually into scaffolds, exoskeletons, endoskeletons, enabling constraints, complex adaptive systems, because that's all wrapped around a lot of the comments you two have just been making. But Dan, I don't know if you want to come back with some of the comments, being the Kanban guy.
No. So I now feel the need, being very British, to explain why I've got that. I was working with a coach, with a group of people at a fashion place. I mean, obviously, look at me, I'm into fashion. And we had a new coach being briefed by a colleague of mine that started, and I went to the canteen or the cafeteria where they were doing that to get a cup of coffee. And she just went, "There's Dan, he does Kanban." And this guy went, "Kanban Dan." And my friend Helen, who just locked eyes with me in the, "I'm never going to let you live that down." So I decided to embrace it. That's just to answer that thing. It's worked out nicely. I'm not going to argue, but that's where that came from. It was something I took on. But I do want to talk about Expedite. I remember my graddy job. I used to work at British Airways straight out of university, and I was programming their airline mainframe system in machine code. It was, it was really low level techie stuff back in the day.
I started my life doing a bit of hex, but then I went into I wasn't even doing binary. I wasn't at that clever level. And then my first foray as a programmer was BASIC, which probably a lot of people have no idea what I'm talking about right now. But
I remember BASIC. BBC BASIC was my first language. But no, and anyhow, I was working on this thing. And by the way, we put code live every 15 minutes on that mainframe and machine code. So, this continuous deployment thing, not new. And yes, you can do it on legacy systems. You just have to choose to. Anyway, putting that to one side. So this system, I remember my first piece of work was about 10 lines of code. A code review didn't review the segment. It reviewed every byte of code I'd written, byte by byte. And it took 3 months to put that 10 lines of code live. And of course, I'd written the code in the first week. It was testing because I had to do all my own testing. And by the way, this thing had no time slicing and no shelling. So if you decided to write a piece of memory, you must know what you're doing. You're a developer. If you happen to have operating system there, well, that's your fault. Hence, you need 15 minutes of fame when you go live. But anyhow, this system still to this day, for most airlines, they have either their own one or they're hosted somewhere else. It's an IBM mainframe system, and it does it does the bookings, it does the baggage, it does the staff allocations, the fuel, the passenger name lists. Basically, without that system, the airline cannot sell a ticket or fly a plane or find a bag. Nothing. So I was told very clearly, you better test this thoroughly, because if the system's down, it's 200 grand a minute. And if it's down for 2 days, we're out of business. That then becomes, so already we're talking about cost of delay, and we're talking about the impact of delay, if you like the more modern phrase. I like cost of delay, but hey, there you go. And we're also talking about the criteria by which you might decide to expedite some work. And the reason I mention this is about 5 years ago, they were having a data center clean, and someone unplugged a plug to put in a Hoover. Not even kidding. That brought down one of the 4 nodes of the mainframe. And even worse, they realized they'd made a mistake. So they quickly plugged it back in, which caused a sync problem, and all 4 nodes of the airline were down. That is an expedite. Because if we do not fix this problem, we are out of business this week. Whatever else you're doing right now, you know what? It really, really doesn't matter. We will take the cost of delay and the impact of every other single thing. If you're not working on fixing that, stop working, get the hell out of the way, because you're going to make the problem worse. That is expedite.
So-
No, I think this is important. Or I put a date in a PowerPoint slide, or no, I'm Amazon and I can't take credit card payments. That's an expedite.
Yep.
I'm going to
Someone to
agree
plug
with
the
you
mainframe.
100%.
That's an
Dan.
expedite.
And because that's the definition the industry and managers, bosses, C-suite folks need to understand what we mean by expedite. It means, critical crisis system
Yep.
down.
Yep.
You really have a sort of a sense of crisis, or and we need to get this done. And I was in Japan with Toyota, probably now 2017 it was. And we were all just about to head out for sushi, as we did most evenings with our Japanese colleagues, and go and have an evening of entertainment. And we got a call from North America saying the Toyota Motor sales, mainframe had gone down. And it had gone down for almost a similar reason. Somebody had tripped over a cable and pulled like 150 discs offline, and the whole thing had gone blur. 2 days later, and it's still down, IBM decided it's faster to actually back it up and then rebuild all the indexes and the data, rather than try and run the sort of disaster recovery. The long-term mitigation for that, the countermeasure, was another $500,000 spent to prevent said things happening and to recover faster. But the mainframe was down for 5 days. Now, that meant no vehicles could be built because no orders could be processed. Because when you're in a just-in-time system, you're not doing like Ford in the news this week, as we're recording this, with 22,000 F-Series trucks waiting for chips that they've built and parked in a lot, and they're going to haul back in, clean, and put in the chips when they get the semiconductor crisis out of the way. In Toyota, if the mainframe's down, there's no orders. I mean, it just literally ceases. That's definitely, in my book and your book, an expedite. This, I suddenly want this little thing done, is not an expedite. And at Bose, we used to call that hip pocket work, which was the hidden work. They come and slip into your hip pocket, for those familiar with wearing waistcoats or vests, as they're called here. And will you just get that done while you can? If we can stop that behavior, see, it's a behavior. We can stop that behavior and coach an organization why that's an inappropriate behavior. We'll actually get much more, and there we go, flow across the board. Yeah, Andy.
It's that kind of behavior that I'm not getting my thing quick enough. And it's very different. Stories from Intel. Intel used to call it lines down when the manufacturing just couldn't happen. They couldn't ship products. But there was a very similar story I heard around a cleaner unplugging, or an intern unplugging, a load of power bank, right, and brought down a whole load of stuff. But I think it's a very interesting conversation. I've had it a few times where you ask CEOs, what happens when something goes wrong, right? What's your emergency plan for, getting a change through to live? The one that sticks out in my mind, I think it was it TSB? Oh, it's going to be one of the banks. It sticks in my mind because the reports in the news where the CEO was camped out in Bristol. I mean, I live in Bristol in the UK, and it's kind of, it's not a particularly big place. So if a big organization, a large bank, has the CEO coming down, and it hits the news, you kind of know about it and you think, oh, that's a big problem. But they had the CEO or CIO camped out in the office in Bristol to try and get the change. I think they were doing a data migration move. And again, it goes back to, how are you acting within your system that you can react like that, in an emergency? You can also start to challenge, well, why does an emergency have that kind of reaction, and why can you react like that in an emergency? And the question that is not often asked is, what can you change to act a bit more like that going forward? Not just fall back into normal behaviors of, okay, whatever system, whatever, change process we have. I'm not saying all organizations need to act chaotically and put themselves in high stress to get there, but there must be changes in your processes that have led you to be able to react like that. I know Dan wants to jump in. I just want to say one final thing is
my favorite thing.
my view on all processes and rules, constraints. Oh, what do I mean? What's the right word? Handoffs. I can't think of the right word. People put processes in place because somebody somewhere screwed up once, right? And so we put in these rules around, okay, protection. And there are protective rules for, perhaps regulatory reasons, and you might want, you might want some handoff, for QA. I certainly know military systems and certain, changes need to be QA'd properly, need to go off to a regulator and those kind of things.
So you're talking about compliance, and we also talk about those types of things as being inhibiting constraints, rules, regulations, etc.
Yes.
The other thing is, if you look at the dictionary definition, this will blow people's minds. A process and a method is exactly the same thing, and a methodology is a collection of processes or methods. So when people say, we've got processes and methods, well, it means it's like saying we've got water and water, or a lake and a lake, which always makes me, for the Brits who listen to this, makes me laugh about Lake Windermere, because mere means lake, so it's Lake Windy Lake.
Mount Fuji, right?
Yes, exactly. It's Mount
so
Mount.
many of those.
But that's the whole point when people get themselves confused about that. Dan, I lost everything I was going to say. I'm going to give it to you now.
So Andy just did like a little bit from my training classes when I do my Kanban system design class. I always ask people, have you ever been in one of those just get it done expedite crisis? Have you ever looked at how people worked? And then it comes out, and then I try and see them, we swarm, and 2 minute cooks -1, the right number of people. And I said, why? What's the imperative? What's causing people to act in this different way? We've got to get it done as soon as we can. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So when you do work, you're not trying to get it done as quickly as you can. Do you understand what efficiency actually means? Because surely, if you look at what your organization's trying to do, it's trying to get as much stuff as it can done as quickly as it can, because the stuff it's doing is meant to have an ROI. Therefore, it gets more money and it grows and does all the good things. And, if it's purpose, like whatever, if it's doing all those things it needs to do more of. But when we see an emergency situation, we act in such a way that is completely different to how we normally act in order to get things done quickly. What's so crap about the rest of the stuff we're doing that we don't want to get it done quickly? Why are we working on so much stuff at once? If we only limited WIP and actually focused on delivering the highest priority, or the 5 highest, if I could get most big organizations down to the 100 highest priority things that could be working on at any given time, then at least we'd be doing something. And look at vaccines. Look at the medical industry in the last 2 years. It takes 10 years to get a vaccine to market. We've never had RNA vaccines. It's been an emerging technology we've been working on and trying to get towards for ages. Look what's happened when the medical companies and the governments and everyone else involved said, let's limit our WIP to focus on the biggest emerging threat we have right now. And let's share the information between companies. Let's be transparent. And all of a sudden, we get in 1 year, how many vaccines are through now and approved? It's probably 5 or 6. Half of them are brand new RNAs. This is awesome. I mean, these are actually going to be the legacy of COVID, is look what we can do as a species when we put our minds to it.
So Dan, let me pick up on that, anyway. Because we need to make an important distinction here, or just make a definition that if we mean prioritization means WIP, or limiting WIP means prioritization.
Well, it causes it, yeah.
Okay, so we just need to be clear. I mean, it's not that I think there's anything wrong in that definition, but a lot of what you describe is people focusing and prioritizing on the thing that's most important. And when your capacity runs out, you stop pulling more work, which is the whole concept of a just-in-time flow system. But it's interesting because a lot of what you were saying resonated, because I had some conversations in previous, I don't know, either sessions, panels, or even presentations when I thought, if we'd put this much effort into malaria or HIV or cancer that we've put into getting rid of COVID, then we probably would be a lot further on in healthcare and in preventative measures for other terrible diseases, You
know what? Do you know what the biggest killer of people is today in terms of medicine? Diarrhea. More people die of diarrhea than malaria. And, it's so easily treatable. All you need is some basically some replenishment and some things that cause you to stop having diarrhea and some clean water. I went out to GDS. There was this guy who was trying to get it. He realized even the poorest villagers in the most remote parts of the world could get Coca-Cola in bottles. So he's trying to look and get Coca-Cola to help him on distribution of basically a free service of here's some stuff that will stop your child dying of diarrhea. And I mean, it comes down to it. That's easily treatable. That's a simple problem. We could choose as a species to say, let's not do that anymore.
So there was a report on the BBC.
Though.
So there's a report on the BBC, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago, that more children and more people are dying of malaria in Africa than COVID has killed. And look at the response to COVID versus the response to malaria. It's left to Bill and Melinda Gates, and I wish them all the best in the future with the news this week of their separation. But the work they've done has done far more. And in the space of 10 months, we start rolling out effective vaccines that are starting to bring this disaster, this crisis under control, which remind me of the other thing when you're talking about expediting and the apathy to general work versus when it's urgent, we're all focused, laser focused. And when it's not, we're all in this apathetic blur mode.
They keep people busy, not get stuff done.
Yeah, and that's what Kotter, and I have some issues with some of Kotter's principles, but one that Kotter used to talk about, or sort of talks about, a sense of urgency. Yeah. How do we maintain a sense of urgency when we're not in a crisis? And that's how we train high-performing teams and effective teams. And we start, and this is one of my rants at the moment. We need to stop teaching people tools and methods. Yeah. Tools and methods are sometimes temporary scaffolds, or they may become XR endoskeletons as permanent fixtures, and there's a mixture, and we can go into more detail about that. But we need to start focusing on teaching people how to do Kumbaya and tools and methods. And what we actually need to do is focus on teach people how to actually leverage their interactions and behaviors. We take their implicit guidance and control, which sort of comes from some of my other conversations on the OODA loop, which is all about individual human performance and how all the things that you've learned from your culture, your DNA, your nurture, and all your life's lessons come back to enable. And this is where you'd be right in the ballpark with the rugby ballpark with sports analogies, because you get people have just got that such implicit capability. They know how to respond in a complex adaptive system, which is what rugby is in rugby union. Everything is entangled in lots of different ways that can't be fully predicted and many times are unknowable, so you're in complexity. But it's that implicit guidance and control that knows when something happens what you're going to do next. And that's the same with all the other players on your team. And then what we need to do is leverage the elements that allow these individuals to work cohesively as a team to actually develop a high performance. And it doesn't really matter the tools, techniques, methods, approaches that they're using, because they will use whatever is contextually relevant to them at that time. And that's, you mentioned Dave, that's the thing I put in my last film that Dave inspired, which is bounded applicability, which is just fancy words to say all tools have constraints or have limited utility. They're all very valuable. Kanban's an incredible tool, and different variants and versions of a theme are all incredibly valuable, but not everywhere. And Scrum fits that category. Scrum is incredibly powerful as a utility, but it has a limitation. And that's why we all have our Swiss Army knives of stuff. So when we're in a different context, we can pull out the blade or the scissor or the whatever works in that context. And that's what I'd like to see coaches coaching. How do we work together to achieve the outcomes, the goals, the results we want? And that encompasses org design and behaviors and cognitions, and guess what? Tools and their applicability. Back to you guys.
So something you said, I can't remember when this came out. I don't know whether Dan or yourself, Nigel, you remember this, but there was a film about degrees of separation. And I think it was a chap trying to get to some famous actress. Oh, I forget. Anyway,
sounds like stalking to me, Andy.
Yeah. So it was basically he realized he was, friends are friends of friends of friends, right? And he wanted to try and meet the people who met the people who he could get to. And I forget the actress's name. All I can think she was in Charlie's Angels and other things. Anyway, and it
There
was
was
a whole.
three of them, by the way. There was three ladies in that movie.
Oh, I'm just terrible with names. Anyway, but what you said reminded me of that kind of when you're looking at why. Yeah, and a lot of kind of my internal rants, I haven't made them external yet, are around this whole growth of organizations and degree of separation. So, you go back to that kind of what happens when things go wrong. The degree of separation goes from like 100 people down to like 6. That focus element, which is another kind of thing, in terms of, what does WIP do? What do we talk about collaboration? This is all a focus problem. How do we get people to focus on what truly is the right thing to go and change? And even when you look at the vaccines and you look at this problem with malaria and you think about the poverty in the world, this is purely, and that was the other thought I had, which was there is a focus problem, and we see that all over the place, but it's also and you probably know the right term for this, but there must be that social lack of responsibility that I feel it's somebody else's problem to go and fix, and that's a social and human, global problem. But also we see that in organizations. So where organizations have just grown and grown and grown and grown. And I was thinking the other day, it's like, you become too overworked, so you go and hire some more people for your team, and suddenly you've got 20 people and the organization's just gone, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and those degrees get wider. And so when they come to fix problems, it's just naturally slower because of growth. And
So
that combined with that lack of that lack of collective responsibility, and this is maybe back into that team space, but I think there's in my mind, all of those kind of play into why we see organizations shaped and behaving the way they are, and how frustrating it would be to just go, right, let's focus in on the real problem.
So let's pivot this, because this is a really good point, because we're now talking about organizational design. We've talked about behaviors, prioritization, limiting work in progress, and various other concepts and constructs here, which does bring us nicely back to the product owner and what Scrum brings that I won't say Kanban lacks, because Kanban approaches it in a different way. But Kanban, I keep saying Scrum contains Kanban anyway, but I talk about it from a visual control and a limit work in progress and a pull-based system and a just-in-time system. If all those concepts are in Scrum, ergo it contains Kanban. I mean,
good Scrum looks like Kanban.
Yeah. I'll let Ken know that. Was that Jeff said that, I think, once. So,
but the other way around, I guess.
I know. So, but the point is this: that what Scrum brings in is a level of discipline, a level of prescription, potentially as a temporary scaffold. So it's something that comes in a structure, in your words, Andy, to provide a way for the team to actually learn how to behave in a certain way, given that habitual sort of behaviors. And then eventually the team may decide, or the group of teams may decide, we don't need Scrum anymore. We figured out our own way of doing things. And to quote my friend Shingo-san, or Ritsuo Shingo, the son of Shigeo Shingo, he says, you have to find your own way. And so we start by giving you these temporary structures. It's like when you're coaching rugby. There's a bunch of stuff you do, which you don't do in the game, but you're doing it to teach techniques, behaviors, understanding, and then that implicitness inside you takes over and stuff just happens. And if you can take a high-performing team, truly high-performing, plonk them in a problem and say, figure it out, they'll decide which tools from the toolbox they want to use and how they're going to work together to solve the problem. But back to the org design issue and the construct of Scrum. So we have a challenge in prioritization, and Jeff used to say that all the time, and I think we all agree that tends to be one of the biggest overwhelming problems. Not enough money, not enough people, too many demands, and big mouths that want to force that in the pipe. So we're doing more expediting than we are doing planned work. And then what happens is, so we bring in Scrum as a construct and we say, okay, we're going to use Scrum. It's going to give us some team level discipline. And I think you'll both agree teaching the teams and coaching the teams is usually pretty easy. Just tell us what you need us to do and how to do it and how to use these tools, and we'll just get on and do our best. And we could argue the whole coaching thing with the Scrum Master later on and their effectiveness and otherwise. But well, it's not that the role's ineffective. It's that sometimes the people fulfilling the role are ineffective because they don't have the level of fundamental understanding and expertise, blah, blah, blah. But then we bring in this role called a product owner, which is our whip manager of some description, which says, here's everything you want to do. But I'm going to focus ideally, and this whole notion of one product owner, one product is idealistic, not realistic. In most large organizations, we say, this is the thing we're going to go do. And we're going to focus on this thing. We've now got this thing called a product goal, which is a type of distal goal, proximal being close to the team sprint goal, distal being further from the team, known as which is in the case of Scrum, a product goal. So we've got our sort of true north, or our general guidance towards a more higher level set of goals and outcomes, and we're going to iterate towards that. Hopefully iterate, not just do increments towards it, but actually iterate towards it. And we're going to make this person a product owner, and their role, accountability, whatever you want to call it, is to make sure that we deliver the maximum value and we achieve the outcomes that have been stated in our distal goal. And therefore, this is now going to force some organizational change, at least in the way we operate, even if not in the structure and the hierarchy. Because now, guess what? I'm in charge of the product, and everything I say is sacrosanct. Even the CEO can't overrule me. He or she has to have a conversation with me, and I will make the decision. Yeah, right. And so basically, this comes in. This is just the reality of this, and this comes in. And then this person is now going to be working with the customers and stakeholders and the financial folks and everybody else, receiving all these inputs from the whole organization. So he or she can design the appropriate structure of the backlog, not even if they don't deal with all the content, but the structuring of the backlog, the prioritization, the ordering, so that we deliver the right outcomes. And that is a massive kaikaku for most traditional handoffish, waterfally type organizations. And that's why I say that people will adopt Kanban, whatever version technique of it you do, because you're making work visible, you're exposing the ugliness, you're turning the rock over in the company and saying, what do you see? What do you think you should do about it? If you see ugliness and you choose to do nothing, then you accept the organizational constraints, and we'll make the workflow visible and help you manage it the best we can. Or you can go look at what needs to change and metaphorically pull the changes, or pull the andon cord if you prefer, and go fix the problems that are causing this organizational constraint, get better flow. Now, that intake column, do we plonk a product owner there because this backlog or this flow across the board is constrained to a single product or a set of products within this group? That's an interesting conversation, because an intake column can be it's just stuff prioritized in some way, versus a product owner, and it's not a products owner, it's a singular, and it assumes a singular product. And we all know in reality, in large corporations, which all of us have worked in, that teams do a ton of stuff coming from multiple different quarters, and it's not just one single product outcome. So I'm going to throw that rant over to you both.
So if you come on my Kanban system design class, the first 2-day class, if you like, in Kanban, you'll hear that there are no roles in Kanban, which is absolutely correct. There are no mandated roles in Kanban. However, if you come on my Kanban systems improvement class, you'll hear that actually we see 2 emergent roles that we are going to give a common title to, because we see them time and time again. The service delivery manager, who is the person I mentioned earlier, from we're going to do this till it's done, make sure it gets there, and a service request manager, who does the upstream bit, the stuff that gets you to that commitment point of what you're going to do. How do we come up with lots of options? Maybe it goes out in that classic expand loads and loads of options, then narrow it down to the options we choose to commit to. So we do see that as a pattern that repeats multiple times. We don't say you must have this person and this is what their job title must be and this is what their accountabilities are. We just say, hang on, things tend to go better if somebody's in charge of working out what the priorities are and coming to a decision there. And things tend to go better if someone's in charge of making sure we get stuff done and that stuff actually flows.
So Dan,
and we don't do the can you just on the side.
You've just validated an initial proposition of mine. Start with Kanban and then evolve to Scrum. Now I'm saying that loosely structured there because guess what? You start with Kanban and that emergence you talk about might become a product owner. And then you've got that role depending upon the context you find yourself in. Because if you're a pure ops team, just doing help desk ticketing and operational type stuff, and we won't get into the DevOps sort of battle and sometimes nonsense, but I mean,
no, I'm 100% with you. I talk about DevOps is nothing. I'm probably shooting myself.
I know, but no. Well, we can have that as a second conversation another day, and probably invite a DevOps.
Do we need to argue amongst ourselves? We all agree on most of this stuff.
But the thing is, if you're in a purely operational context and you're doing help desk ticketing or service ticketing or just keeping the lights on, running the business, you don't need a product owner, but you do need prioritization through SLAs and OLAs and things like that.
Strategy for selecting work,
Yeah, exactly, Andy.
No, I don't want to disagree. No, I want to disagree a little bit. Only I don't disagree about the kind of like the applicability when you should use Scrum or not, right? I think that's fine and that's a choice. But I kind of disagree again, going back to that whole structure thing, that the thing that putting Scrum in place provides, I guess, an opportunity for a conversation about, are we doing the right thing? And the thing that Dan said validated what you were saying, Nigel, about product owners, I guess, to some degree being overstated. And what I mean by that is, I used to work for Nokia or Nokia, depending on how you want to pronounce them. And, you could look at something like this and say, this is a product. Or is, I used to work for music, and music was a product within a product, right?
Yes.
And when you start to look at actually, and what Dan was saying, and this is why I kind of disagree a little bit, because putting the structure of Scrum in place and the accountability in place will force the conversation of the what are we going to work on next. Yeah. The overstatement part of the product owner role, having this budgetary control, this I guess implied having to have the kind of, again, the overruling everybody in the organization. I think the way I think about the product owner role is they can act just as well as a coach for the team in terms of in what order do the team need to pick up work and execute on that in order to make the best value choice for the organization. So now the hard bit, as we know, is then the other stuff, right? Is the negotiating with the rest of the organization about what the team are working on. And then you start to look at the classification of, so what do you then call a product? Is I'll give you an example, a business process, coaching a team new to Scrum that are working on business process change. There's no software. This is purely process change to gain efficiency. And they had a product owner who was a business specialist, and their role was to basically negotiate with the stakeholders and say, yep, we're making this business process change because we believe these efficiencies will be gained and this value will be gained as a result. So we're going to save money. We're going to potentially reduce costs. We're actually going to make changes in our call center as a result of this. We're going to help our customers. We're going to do these kind of things. That to me is a product owner. They are looking out for the benefits of the organization as well as the team and the part they're playing towards, helping.
So I know Dan wants to jump in, but you just triggered something. I wrote a paper or co-authored a paper with some clever people, including Professor Turner at UNT, University of North Texas, for the non-US viewers. And it was all on multi-team systems. And we were looking at proposing new approaches to multi-team systems, because when you scale beyond one team, it's not called SAFe, by the way, everybody. It's called a multi-team system. I'm just saying, and it's not called Nexus either, or less, or Scrum at scale. It's called a multi-team system. All the aforementioned are tools, techniques, methods, and approaches you may choose to apply in a multi-team system. But we proposed the no need for the scrum master and the product owner, as you just described them, as a coach. In later evolution of the work in the stuff I've been doing on that stuff behind me, we start now talking about the construct or the concept of a boundary spanner. Now, not the spanner as in what we mean by a wrench, which I have to translate the American English here, but a boundary spanner isn't something we invented, but it is in the literature about how you manage the areas, the boundaries between teams and between multi-team systems. You can have lots of multi-team systems in a complex organization like you were describing, or maybe it's complicated, but we'll part that one for another day. But you've got products within products that consist of more products, and you've got all that. You've got all the base elements of this as substrates. Then you've got all the sort of things that the user interact with, and all the services and the stuff that the user doesn't see, all the clever stuff behind the scenes. And so that then becomes this very complex product delivery organization. And that's when you are into multi-team systems. Imagine building an aircraft, an airliner. So you've got these many, many subsystems of which have some level of prioritized ownership of the stuff that has to be delivered. You've then got timelines that have to be met. And this is where I advocate for the lean thing called the last planner system, which is used in construction, which makes sure everything is supposed to come together at the right time. All that is about communication, collaboration, distal goals and how all these distal goals align. And then you may even end up with medial goals, which is something in the middle. So these are all the things that I think that are really critical and important. But to steer us back to the product owner, I think we're I'm not trying to conclude anything here, but I think we're in agreement that we all understand the limitation of tools and the applicability and the bounded applicability. We already understand some of the problems that we see frequently as practitioners in organizations. And to Dan's point, you start to see patterns that are continuously emergent, that even if you start off with a simple visual board that just says, what does work as imagined actually look like when you see it as work as done? So whether you do a value stream map and then you map it on a visual board with a bunch of columns, so you can actually see how work moves across the system and where it gets congested and blocked and otherwise, at some point, what will emerge is the need for managing that priority, that work in progress, etc. And to badly paraphrase, as everybody does what Ken Schwaber said many years ago, and he did say a version of this, that Scrum is like your mother-in-law, yeah? Even though she loves you very much, if you invite her to stay, she'll point out all your faults. And so what Scrum has done for me, it did it in Toyota, it did it in 3M, it's done it in Bose and other companies. The minute you forcibly shove this thing in, and you do shove it in, I mean, there's no two ways about it. It's not this, I mean, all right, we train everybody and then we all go launch teams, but we shove it in. And then what happens is we suddenly, all the ugliness has come to bear because we can't move from the beginning any further because of all this stuff nobody's ever dealt with in the years gone by. And what I tend to find when I just do pure Kanban with groups is we visualize the work. The teams can work on OPEX, operational excellence, lots of teaming stuff and efficiency stuff, so task work and teamwork, to move stuff quicker. But the majority of stuff that hobbles them are external dependencies. And these are all the things that nobody's ever bothered to fix: process departments, compliance, handoffs, blah, 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 external suppliers, all the stuff the team has no power to deal with. And the poor old product owner typically has no power to go fix this. And then you've got some, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but lowly scrum master, because they always pitch the scrum master as some sort of, ground floor role rather than as a serious expert in coaching an organization to do better, which is the disparity. So they bring this lowly scrum master in, who's typically a contractor, so they got no bloody rights anyway. And you say to Scrum Master, oh, you need to go fix all these organizational constraints and dependencies. And you wonder why it becomes a shit show.
But it's really similar. You can look at that in exactly the same way as the constraints that are put on product owners. The expectations of a product owner to magically make these, high value, deliveries based upon, key decisions that the business are making. Actually, they don't have the respect. I mean, you put it quite succinctly, better than I'm trying to articulate now, but they don't have that level of respect or the accountability within the organization to go and influence any of that. And so maybe this is maybe this is coming down. This is something I was thinking earlier, which is actually how people are treating change and treating their agility, change, transformation, whatever you want to call it. But are they taking it seriously? Are they treating that, the value they're going to get out of working in a slightly different way, ever so slightly differently?
Go on, Dan.
Go on, Dan.
I learned something which is so poignant to like the last 10 minutes almost. So I'm going to try and refer it all together. A very, very clever woman, a much cleverer woman than I, Diane Moffat, she was called. And she was the head teacher of my local infant school. So this was in the UK. So it's 4 to 7 year olds. Start at 4, finish at 7. And she'd been in that role for 20 odd years when I turned up as a school governor. And one of the things in her 20-odd year is she got rid of the golden rules for the school. Now, we're talking about 4 to 7 year olds. They need constraints. Of course they do. Otherwise, they're going to do things. They're not really that aware of other. It's all about self at that age. And she brought in a rights and responsibilities charter. And it was a huge success. You have the right to play safely in the playground. You have the responsibility not to make things unsafe for the other kids in the playground. Kids in their innate state, before we have broken them, humans who have not been trained otherwise by years of nonsense of civilization, know that rights and responsibilities go together. And when you have the Scrum Master you just talk, where they have responsibility but no rights, things don't go well. And similarly, when you talk about the product owner who has the rights to decide what happens on the product backlog and in what order, no matter what the CEO says, they also have the responsibility for what goes on the backlog in what order. And if they're arguing with the CEO, that might mean they get sacked. And that's fine. But you can only use that weapon once. It's a very dangerous thing to do multiple times. But it's a rights and responsibilities thing. People, one of the biggest things you hear from kids is when you tell them something, that's not fair. And that's because we always want this innate sense of fairness. Rights and responsibilities go with that. It comes to the core of what it means to be human. And all of this stuff is just about that, really. And do we need this? I often used to describe Scrum as the stabilizers or the training wheels in American on a bike. You learn how to be an agile team by having this structure around you that stops you hurting yourself while you're learning. But you get the right to do it, but you also get the responsibility to do it. Now, companies often like to give you responsibility without rights, which tends to not go well. And people often want rights without responsibility, and that tends not to go well either. You need to have it in balance. And so, again, we're on the bike in balance. Beautiful.
Dan, I'm going to use that, and I might put that into something, because that's actually a superb, succinct way of describing it. Because what you described in fancy language that I use in the flow system is within managing constraints is inhibiting constraints and enabling constraints. And enabling constraints say, here's the guardrails. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't exceed these limits, whether it's fiscal, behavioral, blah, blah, blah. And we're working on some new papers around that to sort of better clarify these things. And then when you talk about Scrum as the training wheels, you're talking about that as a scaffold, as a temporary scaffold, which is an aid to learning. That's what a scaffold is in that construct. It's an aid to learning. And then by having inhibiting and enabling constraints, you've got these sort of rights and rules that you're talking about, which is, these are the things thou shalt never do. Yeah. Thou shalt poke each other in the eye and bop each other on the nose. I'm talking about small kids now. But thou shalt run around and have as much fun as you want to, but you don't go out the school gate or climb over the fence or do anything that endangers life and limb. That's an enabling constraint. And so what happens within an organization when we're coaching people, we're coaching these behaviors, which is what we describe. See, it all comes back to the same thing. Just one tangent on Andy, that word transformation, I've railed against that incessantly. It is completely the wrong word. I would advise everybody watching this to go get a dictionary and have a look at what it actually means, because there's no such thing as an agile, lean or Scrum or digital transformation.
I tell you, I did a talk around personal transformation and personal performance. And I said, it's transformation describes like an end state. It's one to another, and nothing that we do actually ends up being like that. Even personally, I guess we all have an end of life, but if we're trying to transform personally, that actually, that describes some end state we're going to get there. We're not there. We're constantly evolving. We're constantly bettering ourselves. And so when we look at organizations and how teams evolve, and that's all it is, it's just moving our goalposts that little bit
Evolution,
further.
that's
Yeah.
exactly. It's
Evolution,
evolution, and digital is modernization, and because you're taking old crap and making it better, hopefully. So that's modernization of tools, techniques, technology. And of course, all tools, including digital, is enabling. And that's the whole point. It's an enabling construct for us. And you're talking about constant evolution, because the dictionary says to change, a transformation is to turn one thing into another. So again, I'm going to turn my can of water into an iPhone. That's transformation. And yes, you're probably right. You know, when we die, we transform from this complex adaptive system into something that's completely dead, inanimate, blah, blah, blah. So if you want, I was laughing in my own head as you were speaking, because I was thinking, yes, we're going to transform this live, thriving company into one that's dead.
It doesn't exist, and we can't do it from a personal point of view. It's all around these kind of goals, right? And what goal and objective are we trying to head towards? Actually, somebody was saying the Microsoft didn't use the word goal; they use the word objective, because objective describes kind of a more kind of direct path to go for as a goal, is just a much wider perspective. And I kind of like that as you know, when I'm talking to people about their personal objectives, what is that thing? You know, it's not a transformation, but what are you going after? What is the change? What is the change you want to see? You know, and you look at the team and you say, okay, so what are we going after, team? What's our objective? Whether that be from a product development point of view, or just a transformation change point of view, right? Where do we want to be? You know, and a great one somebody said to me the other day is, what's the conversation you want to be having tomorrow or next week or next month or at the end of next sprint? What's that conversation? What's the conversation you don't want to be having? You know, none of those are transformation things. They are purely ways of getting to a different, you know, place in time, point in time, you know, being a different human being, being a different person. And again, I just want to come back and just I am going to go and buy a Be More Human t-shirt, or just get it plastered on my forehead. But you know, reflecting what Dan was saying earlier, sorry, just one more thing. It was just around the coaching thing that, you know, I went and did a course with CTI, the Coactive Training Institute, and I was reflecting on it again today as a very how do I say it? A very hippie way of looking at coaching. It is. It's very out there. There are some concepts that I really railed against and actually didn't sit comfortably with me. But what it taught me was a lot more about human beings and kind of playing a bit more freely. And it taught me a lot about myself as a coach. So kind of reflecting on that, you know, what do I think of myself as a coach? What do I do well? What don't I like? And you know, when now working with people, and it's changed my perspective, you know, not massively, right? I wasn't some like really angry person going, do this, but it just changed my perspective on the kind of the belief system of people and what people bring to the table, and how, you know, even the smallest change can either really, you know, just tweak the performance, or actually, you know, turn it the other way. So something you say innocuously could actually just completely shut somebody down from your perspective. You know, and it might be a trigger that you have zero control over. And again, you play this. I always like to start small, and a great professional Scrum trainer, Edwin Dando, said this to me. He said it was about scaling. He said, whatever you find whatever you find painful at a team level, you'll find excruciating when you scale it. And I just love that, because if you're not getting either yourself, your people, your team, if you're not getting that, how they are functioning correctly, and you just want to go and blindly pace Scrum or Kanban or your choice of change method, you want to go and blindly pace that. If you haven't got the basics right, you are going to, you know, fail. It's the same sport analogies. It's the same with, you know, if we go play in the rugby space, if you haven't got that repeatable pattern and understanding, you're going to find it hard, and you're going to find it excruciating.
So that's the one thing. I had a keynote I was giving a few months ago at some of the events I was being asked to speak at, called if you want to be agile, first get lean. because I was trying to say, if you don't understand the fundamental principles, and you can go back even further into scientific management, predating TPS and that type of thing, but if you don't understand these fundamental principles, you have no right coaching an organization on methods and tools that you've learned on a 2-day course and got a pretty certificate. You need to put a lot of effort into studying. And, we're PSTs, and the reason I keep paying my subs every year to keep my badge is because I actually think the community is a really good community, and it contains a lot of extremely brilliant and clever people. I don't always agree with, Scrum, but Scrum is a narrow lens for the business of Scrum. The people participating in it have a much wider lens, a wider vision, this peripheral vision of all, and they understand a lot of these things. But unfortunately, I've mixed with a lot of people who've last week were a BA, and now they're a Scrum Master. Yeah. And it's not to decry the person's career aspirations and their achievements in bettering themselves, but to that point about those 4 questions that Dan asked us earlier on about coaching, you have to be able to look in a mirror and recognize your limitations and recognize how you need to grow before you start going and advising and guiding other people. It's like the analogies or metaphors where people say, you can go and learn all about flying a plane. You can play a Microsoft simulator. You can read all the books, pass all the exams. It does not make you a pilot. No. Yeah. And I've been talking about this more recently when we talk about implicit versus explicit knowledge. We can all learn how to read music, we can all learn how to play a piano. Mozart, I will never be. Did Mozart? I know Mozart played the piano, but anyway, the point is this: is that coaching is an art form. I mean, it's not just a scripted approach. It's not a methodology. You don't have a checkbox to be a coach. And even you say this about project management, when people used to say to me, how do I train to be a project manager? Well, you live it and experience it, and you gather the skills necessary, because it's not a methodology. It's all about, communication, collaboration,
passion and drive, right? Passion and drive play a huge part in pushing yourself. It's that kind of the damping. I was thinking of that line, intrinsic motivation, right? I think that's the one thing that sits in my mind from that famous talk he's done. But the passion and drive to do something different, and this is when you start to see teams win. And my favorite example is a team working on a not so great piece of software, right? I can't say what it was, but it was terrible. But they were so passionate about their approach to work and the quality they would put in, they became kind of passionate about this very crappy product, and they started to lead with, again, we're back in that product owner space, but because they held so much passion and pride to do the right thing, the product didn't get any less crappy, but their approach to the changes they were making were just as professional as you would see in, I don't know, like you go, let's say Apple. I don't know whether they are highly professional, but you could imagine there's an element of pride and passion to go and make the right changes. And so, again, when we kind of start to think about people and our pride and our passion, what is, one of those 4 questions, right? What's your passion? Why? I think it might even be your number 2, right? Your number 2 question.
So the German one was, why do you coach the way you do, was number 2. But why do you coach? And I guess that's the thing. Why do you coach? What's in it for you? What's your
Yeah, and it's the pride and passion thing. I pride myself on ensuring that I'm doing the best job I can. I pride myself in a great another PST said it, and I forget his name right now, and I'd love to credit him. Jim Sammons said this to me. He said, "Scrum Mastery is like the Hippocratic Oath, the do no harm." And I really like that as a quote, which is, I'm going to go and help these people learn to do something different, and I'm going to do ever so much not to make anything worse for them. And again, it's, I don't know, I like that. I just like, part of my passion and pride for the way I interact with people is that, I try not to do harm. I try to help people forward themselves and whatever they're building, and try and create teams that are highly passionate around even the crappiest of products.
You've got the right to help people do things better in the ways that you suggest, and you have the responsibility not to get them fired while doing so.
Yeah.
that kind of comes back to that again.
But sorry to interrupt you on that, Nigel. Around, you just
no. I was nodding and smiling in complete agreement, because when people ask me, and I was thinking about this as I was listening to you, and then as Dan was just adding and reminding us there, I decided I want to make a difference. Now, hopefully a positive difference, not a negative difference. Some people who have mixed with me over the years may, of course, disagree, and that's entirely up to them, as he says in his Clarkson voice. But the thing is, that I am disruptive, but I'm disruptive, I hope, in a way that is valuable, and again, people will disagree. But I would like to make a difference. So some of my efforts in the last 2 or 3 years has been now trying to, I've had enough of fighting organizational friction. And then there's many people who watch this, and you guys know that are up against that every single day of the week. I'm no longer prepared to fight. I've got to an age where I've said, I'm not going to die fighting people. I want to die enjoying myself and not die fighting battles, which I can never win anyway, because the machinery is too big to win. But I'd like to be able to nudge in the right direction, as Snowden says, give them a little nudge. And I'd like to be able to help where I can. And I'm motivated to make a difference. Now, I don't care whether Toyota ever quote me again as long as I live since I've left. But if I helped people there to make a difference or to improve the way they work, I did something worthwhile. Yeah. So now, by working with other people who are much better at writing books than me and visual, so I'm hoping to share knowledge and share experiences, and to give people ideas, inspiration and stuff, so they can go and improve either individually, as a group, or as an organization. And so that's my intrinsic motivation to do that. We all need to make a living, and if you want to pay me for doing that, I'm very happy to accept payment. Yeah, and I'm sure you guys would echo that.
It's nice to pay the bank every month for the mortgage.
Yeah, coming out of these COVID periods, and we all have commitments and families and people we love and support. But at the end of the day, I don't want to do anybody harm or hurt anybody. And I've aggravated people, annoyed people, maybe eminently pissed them off in America, occasionally. But it's all come from the right sort of direction, that I'm trying to help you see how you can improve. And my philosophy now has really turned around to, my job isn't to tell you what to do. My job's to help you learn to see what you need to do, which I think is what we're describing here. Yeah. Yes, we will coach methods and tools, because, hey, we're experts in some of those things. Yeah, we do that. But ultimately, we want you to get from us what you desire to help you do what you want to do as a person, an individual, organization, group, whatever. And we'll do our level best to achieve that. And we have a big toolkit. And some of the tools are painful. It's like going to the dentist, you need to go, and it's for your own good, but it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable for a period of time, hopefully not too long, and you won't argue and fight with the dentist too much. But at some point, things will get better, and we may decide that, hey, Scrum doesn't work for you, but we've learned something, and now we can adjust and adapt, and we can find something that fits better for you or works more appropriately. So I don't know if we've answered the original question as I try and bring us to a conclusion for this conversation, but it's definitely disruptive. It's definitely a kaikaku. It's definitely revolutionary. It's not mandatory. There are many other ways to achieve the outcomes, but it is valuable. Andy, what do you want to add?
No, I think the original conversation was I think what sparked it in my brain was, it was almost a challenge to the value of the product owner, and that sounds very kind of argumentative, but I think. And I'm really glad we've had this conversation, because it's expanded it definitely for me from the perspective that we recognize there is a need for somebody to help pull a team in the right direction from a product space and coach them. I'm going to use that coaching space, from a product point of view. And I think that's time and time again recently, I've seen that lacking and absolutely necessary. And when you start to put that in place, the team transforms, and I can't argue against it. I don't think we're going to solve the, is Scrum revolutionary? Should we do Scrum first or Kanban first? I think, I think that might be even just down to a personal stance, and I don't think we're in any strange company when we all probably agree that, the first thing we do is go and try and find where the work is and how people are working, then have a conversation about the tools and methods. So
I'm gonna say to you that what you're describing, lean folks would talk about, go to Gemba, do some Genshi Genbutsu, value stream map the current processes, visualize the current processes. Guess what? That's Kanban. It's maybe not a board with columns, but the literal definition. And then start understanding where the constraints, the bottlenecks, at the organization and the team levels and the product levels are, and start working to eliminate them to improve that flow of value to these things we call customers. Now, does that mean that, I mean, I provocatively use the question in our PST gathering, is Kanban eating Scrum for lunch? Because I think the resistance level in organizations to Scrum is much less than the resistance potentially to this forced change.
Yep. No, I totally agree. And again, it goes back to the value I've seen in approaching the value stream mapping, the visualization of their work is far more powerful than just saying do Scrum.
Yes.
You could do that and do nothing else, and people would go, and they've said, wow, I've never seen my backlog look like that, or I've never seen the amount of work we've got in progress look like that. Wow, haven't we got a lot of things on? Or, oh my God, et cetera, right?
I call it the apocalypse now moment. It's when they map their workflow and work for the first time and realize the horror of the situation they're actually in every single day. It's like, why do we do that? Why are you doing this to yourselves?
Yeah, and that's and if that's a method, if that's a tool, if that's a thing, I will do that every time. And funny enough, I was doing it even before probably I knew Scrum, and whether I knew it was part of Kanban or Scrum, I just continued doing it.
So I want to say this because you guys are Brits, and that I live in Texas, but trust me, I'm not from these parts, y'all. But the thing is this. Many years ago, and I'm talking about early 80s, okay, before I even knew anything about lean, before I even knew there was a thing called Kanban, and then by then it was just in the annals of Toyota and stuff doing Kanban. I used a thing called a T-card rack. Now, English people know what T-card systems are. If you don't, just Google T-card systems, as in the letter T. It's basically metal racks in columns with slots, and a card drops in them, and it's got a T-bar on it, so it doesn't drop all the way through.
And it sits in, right?
And you write along the top, something that tells you what it is. And guess what? These cards go in these slots in prioritized order, and then the columns are the progression of the cards across the board. Well, that's Kanban in anybody else's language from, basic methodology point of view. And I'd have a blocked area. I'd have, an expediter. I'm making these words up now, but that's how I was using it. And, and I'd have a way of managing this. And this is how I managed an appliance repair business for several years in Nottingham, where I originally hail from. And then years later, when I start to read all the lean books and I actually go work for the company that invented a lot of these techniques, or at least evolved them, and then started my career at Toyota, I went, oh, really? And I've tried to get T-card racks, but they don't make them in America land. It's a real British thing. But anyway, these things, and this is the final point from me, is that a lot of what we profess are newfangled tools, techniques, methods, and approaches have been around over 100 years. You just need to go read the damn history books. Shewhart invented statistical quality control, not Six Sigma, and that's a historical fact. And then predating Shewhart, you've got all the scientific management methods. And I've got books on my bookshelves from 1850. Talking about some of the nonsense that we talk about now and pretending we just invented a new way to make the wheel more effective, I
can quote another very intelligent woman in this, my mum. She says, every generation thinks they invented swearing and sex, which is a miracle we all got here, right?
What a place to end
I knew from the 50s or earlier.
What a place to end this. I encourage you to watch some of my OODA loop conversations where I have a police officer putting his arm the full length through a slinky with lots of interesting conversations about kinky slinkies. So I just, if anybody's interested in that, go watch the series of videos on the OODA loop, an exploratory of conversations with clever people. Gents, I think we should do another round of this because the avenues we didn't explore and could explore. I enjoyed this immensely. It's just brilliant to talk to people that are not fixated on a method approach, a religion, a philosophy, and can align with some general ideas. And I think we're all trying to make things better for people who are struggling. And I think if there was more coaches in the world like you two, maybe better looking and not so British, I think the industry would get a better reputation. So I hope a few people watch this on this. I'm just going to end the recording. Just bear with me a second.
Cool.